When did World War II end? The end of World War II, one of the most momentous events in modern history, was a culmination of years of brutal conflict, political maneuvering, and unprecedented destruction. The war, which began in 1939 with Adolf Hitler's invasion of Poland, drew in nearly every major nation across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, and led to the death of tens of millions of people. The eventual conclusion of this devastating conflict in 1945 was not the result of a single event, but rather a series of interconnected battles, strategic decisions, and massive global shifts. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Life Q&A, answering the basic questions of life. The road to the end, Europe's fall. By early 1945, the tide had turned decisively against the Axis powers, especially in Europe. Nazi Germany, once the dominant force under Hitler, was being squeezed on all sides. The Allies, consisting of the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and their numerous partners, had made significant inroads into Europe. The D-Day invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, was a turning point in the European theater. The success of this operation allowed Allied forces to advance through France and push the German forces back toward their homeland. By early 1945, Allied troops had crossed the Rhine River into Germany, and the Red Army of the Soviet Union was advancing from the east, having already taken over much of Eastern Europe. Inside Germany, the situation was bleak. Adolf Hitler, who had once commanded an empire stretching from the French Atlantic coast to the Russian steppes, was now holed up in a bunker in Berlin. His top generals were either dead, captured, or had lost faith in their leader's ability to wage war. Morale among German troops was collapsing, and many ordinary citizens were desperate for an end to the fighting. The German infrastructure had been bombed into oblivion, and cities were left in ruins. In late April 1945, as Soviet troops entered the outskirts of Berlin, Hitler recognized that his dream of a thousand-year Reich had crumbled. On April 30, 1945, he took his own life in his bunker, marking the symbolic end of Nazi leadership. A few days later, on May 2nd, Berlin fell to the Soviets. Soon after, the remaining Nazi high command signed an unconditional surrender on May 7, 1945 in Reims, France, effectively ending the war in Europe. This day is now commemorated as Victory in Europe Day, observed on May 8th. The streets of London, Paris, New York, and Moscow were filled with celebrations as people rejoiced at the end of the long, dark years of war. In Europe, the joy was tempered by the sheer scale of destruction that the war had left behind. Cities like Warsaw, Dresden, and Stalingrad were unrecognizable, millions of people were displaced, and the Holocaust had revealed the horrifying depths of Nazi atrocities. The Pacific Theater, Japan's reluctance to surrender. Although Germany had fallen, the war was not yet over. On the other side of the world, Japan continued to fight bitterly. The conflict in the Pacific had been raging since Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, and the U.S., along with its allies, had been engaging in a grueling island-hopping campaign to push Japanese forces back. Battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa were costly for both sides, with tens of thousands of lives lost as the Allies drew closer to the Japanese mainland. Despite the losses and the evident futility of continuing the war, Japan's military leadership was unwilling to surrender. They had instilled in their people a philosophy of fighting to the death, rather than facing the humiliation of defeat. Japanese soldiers routinely fought with incredible tenacity, and the use of kamikaze pilots, who sacrificed themselves in suicide missions against Allied ships, demonstrated the lengths to which they would go. The Allies faced a difficult decision. An invasion of Japan, which would involve landing forces on the main islands, was projected to result in even more catastrophic casualties than those already witnessed in battles across the Pacific. American military planners estimated that millions of lives, both Allied and Japanese, would be lost in a full-scale invasion. At this critical juncture, the United States, under President Harry S. Truman, opted to deploy a new and terrifying weapon, the atomic bomb. Developed in secret through the Manhattan Project, the bomb represented a revolution in warfare, capable of destroying entire cities in an instant. On August 6, 1945, a U.S. bomber dropped the first atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. The bomb detonated with unimaginable force, killing an estimated 140,000 people, many of them civilians. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki, killing another 70,000. The impact of these two bombings was immediate and profound. Japan's cities were already suffering from relentless bombing raids, food shortages, and a crumbling economy. But the sheer scale of destruction from the atomic bombs, combined with the Soviet Union's declaration of war against Japan and its invasion of Manchuria, forced the Japanese leadership to confront the reality that continuing the war was impossible. Japan's surrender. The end of World War II. On August 15, 1945, Japanese Emperor Hirohito took the unprecedented step of addressing his nation via radio. In his speech, Hirohito acknowledged the devastating power of the new weapon and the need to bring the conflict to a close to avoid further suffering. This broadcast was the first time most Japanese citizens had ever heard their emperor's voice, and it left many in stunned disbelief. While some hardliners in the military were still resistant to surrender, it was clear that the war was over. Negotiations began, and on September 2, 1945, aboard the U.S. battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Japan formally signed its unconditional surrender to the Allied forces. This day is now remembered as Victory over Japan Day, or VJ Day. The ceremony, led by U.S. General Douglas MacArthur and attended by representatives of the Allied nations, marked the official end of the deadliest conflict in human history. The conclusion of World War II not only brought an end to the fighting but also ushered in a new era of international politics and global reconstruction. Aftermath. A changed world. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, the world faced immense challenges. Europe and much of Asia lay in ruins, with millions of people displaced by the fighting. The war had claimed an estimated 70 to 85 million lives, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. In Europe, the Holocaust had wiped out 2/3 of the continent's Jewish population, and survivors of the concentration camps were left to rebuild their shattered lives. The end of the war also led to the beginning of the Cold War, a tense ideological and political struggle between the two remaining superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The dropping of the atomic bomb marked the dawn of the nuclear age, and in the coming decades, the threat of nuclear war would loom over international relations. In response to the atrocities and devastation of World War II, the international community sought to prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again. In 1945, the United Nations was established with the goal of promoting peace and cooperation among nations. The Nuremberg trials brought Nazi war criminals to justice, and the world came to terms with the full horrors of the Holocaust. Meanwhile, Japan and Germany, the two nations most responsible for the war, were occupied and rebuilt under Allied supervision. In the years that followed, both countries would emerge as peaceful, democratic states and major economic powers. Conclusion. A global legacy. The end of World War II in September 1945 brought to a close 6 years of unparalleled destruction and suffering. Yet the legacy of the war continues to shape the modern world. The political borders, alliances, and institutions that were established in the wake of the war continue to influence global geopolitics, and the lessons learned from the war about the dangers of totalitarianism, the need for international cooperation, and the consequences of nuclear weapons remain relevant to this day. World War II was a defining moment in human history, a conflict that not only reshaped nations, but also left an indelible mark on the collective memory of the world. The end of the war may have brought relief, but it also left humanity with the realization of the immense capacity for both destruction and renewal. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Life Q&A, answering the basic questions of life.